The banging started before anyone called for help. It came from the far end of the housing unit inside Rikers Island, sharp metal sounds echoing down the corridor just after midnight. At first, officers thought it was another argument between cells. That happened often enough. But then one inmate from the Bronx began shouting one word again and again. "Medical! Medical!" Officer James Porter ran toward the sound with his radio already in hand. The lights above the tier flickered the way they often did late at night, making the long row of steel doors look colder than before. At cell 18, 3 inmates were gripping their bars, all pointing toward the next door. Inside cell 19, a young detainee lay motionless on the lower bunk. His blanket had slipped halfway to the floor. His cellmate stood pressed against the wall, both hands raised, breathing hard. Porter called for medical staff immediately. But even before backup arrived, he noticed something wrong. The emergency call button near the cell door had deep scratch marks around it, like someone had hit it many times. And no response had come. Then Porter heard another officer behind him whisper, "Not again." That word stayed in the air, because everyone on that floor knew what it meant. Another inmate found unresponsive. Another late-night emergency. Another question about how long someone had waited before anyone reached the cell. Porter looked down the corridor. Several officers had already stopped talking. One nurse arrived pushing a cart. A supervisor followed seconds later. The cell opened. The nurse dropped to one knee. No one spoke for a moment. Then the supervisor turned toward Porter and asked quietly, "When was the last round?" Porter checked his watch. And suddenly realized the answer could change everything. Because the official log said checks had happened 12 minutes earlier. But Porter knew that was not true. And before he answered, the cellmate spoke from the corner. He was asking for help before lights changed. That sentence would matter later. But the story had started long before midnight. Earlier that same day, New York City looked cold and gray. Traffic moved over bridges. Sirens bounced off apartment buildings in the Bronx. Subway trains crossed elevated tracks while people hurried through winter air. For many families in Bronx neighborhoods, jail was already part of daily conversation. A missed phone call. A court date. A waiting hearing. A brother, cousin, or son inside custody. That morning, Marcus Rivera sat inside intake after transfer paperwork from Bronx Criminal Court. 24 years old. Raised near Fordham Road. Arrested on a parole violation tied to an older robbery case. He had heard stories about Rikers all his life. Everyone in his neighborhood had. Stories about delays. Stories about violence. Stories about officers stretched thin. Stories about men waiting hours for medicine. Now he was entering it himself. The first thing he noticed was noise. Doors buzzing open. Voices layered over radios. Metal carts rolling across concrete. The second thing he noticed was how tired the officers looked. Officer James Porter had worked night and day rotations for months because staffing shortages kept changing schedules. He was not old, but the last year had made him look older. He checked Marcus into housing with 2 other Bronx detainees, Tyler Grant and Aaron Cole. Tyler talked too much because he was nervous. Aaron said almost nothing. Marcus asked Porter quietly, "How bad is this place really?" Porter did not answer immediately. Then he stamped paperwork and said, "Keep your head down." That was not comfort. It sounded more like warning. Housing Unit C looked worn before Marcus even entered. Paint chipped near the bars. Old fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of bleach mixed with damp concrete. Several cells already held detainees waiting for hearings, transfers, or court returns. Many came from the Bronx. Some from Brooklyn. Some from Queens. Inside, neighborhood still mattered. But survival mattered more. Marcus took the upper bunk in cell 19. His cellmate was Daniel Ross, 27, from the Bronx, arrested on a weapons case and already inside for weeks. Daniel spoke quietly. "Don't count on rounds being on time." Marcus looked at him. "What does that mean?" Daniel leaned back against the wall. "It means sometimes people bang on doors too long before anyone comes." That answer felt too calm. Too practiced. A low moment followed. Lunch trays. Plastic cups. Quiet conversation through bars. Marcus learned names around him. Cell 17 held Tyler. Cell 18 held Aaron and another detainee from the Bronx named Chris Miller. Across the tier, an older detainee named Leon asked every officer for extra medicine and got the same answer each time. Medical request is pending. That phrase repeated often enough that nobody reacted anymore. Porter noticed it too. He noticed many things that had stopped surprising others. Delayed medication. Late escorts. Missed checks during shift overlap. Paperwork signed before actions finished. Inside Rikers, routine sometimes looked complete on paper even when real movement lagged behind. By afternoon, Marcus began seeing how slowly simple things moved. One detainee asked for asthma treatment. Waited. Another requested a nurse after dizziness. Waited. An officer radioed twice before anyone arrived. The quiet frustration inside the unit built slowly. No shouting yet. Just patience wearing thin. Outside, wind moved across the island. Inside, evening count came late because 2 officers had been reassigned to another housing area after a separate disturbance. That left Porter and 1 younger officer covering more cells than usual. Porter checked doors one by one. He marked logs carefully. But even he knew the timestamps no longer matched exact minutes. There were too many doors. Too few staff. Marcus watched him stop near Leon's cell. Leon again asked for medicine. Porter said, "I called already." Leon answered, "You called yesterday too." Nothing more came after that. Dinner arrived. The low part of jail life returned. Plastic trays, short voices, footsteps, bars. Daniel told Marcus about recent deaths he had heard discussed in whispers. More detainees found unresponsive in different units. Some after medical complaints. Some after late responses. Nobody inside knew every fact, but everyone knew the fear. Marcus asked, "You believe all that?" Daniel looked at the ceiling light. "I believe people stop asking after a while." Night deepened. Around 10:30 p.m., the lights dimmed slightly for night cycle. Tyler from cell 17 called across the bars joking about court dates. Aaron in cell 18 laughed once. For a short time, the floor almost felt calm. Then another low shift happened quietly. Leon stopped speaking. At first no one noticed. He usually tapped his bars every few minutes. Now silence came from his cell. Chris in cell 18 looked over first. "Leon." No answer. Aaron stood at the bars and called for officer check. Porter was already farther down the corridor handling another door issue. By the time he returned, Leon had answered weakly and asked again for medicine. A nurse was called. But the nurse arrived nearly 40 minutes later. Leon was still conscious then. Still waiting. Still breathing hard. The nurse checked him quickly, wrote notes, moved on. No one said much after that. But Marcus saw Daniel watching carefully. Like someone counting how long everything took. Near midnight, power shifted briefly on the floor. Lights flickered. One camera monitor near the desk blinked out for several seconds before returning. Porter noticed because he had already reported that same camera 2 nights earlier. Still not fixed. Then came the banging. Fast. Loud. Urgent. Cell 18 first. Then cell 17. Then voices. Medical. Porter ran. That led him to cell 19. Daniel pressed against wall. Marcus half awake above. And the young detainee below, Aaron, moved only minutes earlier during quiet reassignment nobody had explained, lying motionless on the lower bunk after sudden housing change. Marcus stared down in shock because Aaron had not been his cellmate earlier. Someone had moved Aaron during late count while Marcus was in shower line. No explanation. No paperwork discussed. Just changed. That mattered. Because Marcus had returned to find Aaron there instead of Daniel. And Daniel gone to another cell. Now Aaron was the one unresponsive. The scratch marks near emergency button showed repeated attempts. The cellmate, Marcus now, looked stunned because he had heard Aaron asking for water earlier. Then silence. Then banging. Porter called medical. Supervisor arrived. Nurse checked Aaron. The corridor held still. Then Porter faced the question. When was the last round? The log said 12 minutes. Reality was different. He knew one officer had covered 2 sections late. He knew one round had been delayed. He knew if exact minutes came out wrong, reports would begin immediately. Marcus spoke before Porter answered. He asked for help before the lights flickered. Supervisor looked sharply at Marcus. What time? Marcus shook his head. I don't know. Before the lights changed. The nurse stood up slowly. No one spoke. Then farther down the corridor, another inmate started shouting from cell 14. Not fear. Not anger. Warning. Because Leon, the older detainee who had asked for medicine all day, had now stopped moving too. And at that exact second, every officer on the floor understood they might be facing 2 medical emergencies in one housing unit at the same time. Porter turned towards cell 14. The supervisor looked at the logs. The camera monitor blinked again. And from somewhere beyond the corridor desk, an alarm began sounding that nobody had triggered by hand.